If you're over 50 and you've ever lain awake wondering whether the headache you had last week, or the mole that looks a little different, or your neighbor's diagnosis last spring means something is coming for you too, I want you to stop scrolling for the next 15 minutes and listen closely, because what I'm about to walk you through has quietly reshaped how researchers think about T-cancer risk after 50. Not a miracle pill, not a supplement stack somebody's selling you in the next ad. 5 ordinary daily habits, backed by real, published science, that in combination appear to meaningfully lower the odds of ever hearing those 3 words, it's cancer. I'm a health and science journalist, and for the past several years, I've made it my job to sit with the research, the population studies, the lab findings, the interviews with oncologists and immunologists, and translate it into something you can actually use on a Tuesday afternoon without a medical degree. What you're about to hear isn't hype. It's a pattern that keeps showing up study after study, country after country. People who build these 5 habits into ordinary life tend to face cancer less often, and when it does show up, they tend to face it from a stronger position. I'm going to count these down from 5 to 1, because the last one is the habit that researchers increasingly describe as the master switch, the one that seems to amplify everything else on this list. Don't skip to the end. Each habit sets up the next, and by the time we get to number 1, you'll understand exactly why doctors who study this call it the most underused tool in cancer prevention. Also, if you want to know exactly where you're starting from, drop your age in the comments, or just tell me which of these 5 areas worries you the most. I read every comment, and it genuinely shapes what I cover next. Let's start with habit number 5, because it's the one hiding in plain sight in almost everyone's kitchen. Every single day, trillions of cells in your body divide and replace themselves, and every time that happens, your cells have to copy your DNA perfectly. They don't always succeed. Your body has a built-in proofreading system, enzymes whose entire job is to catch copying errors before they turn into mutations, and before mutations turn into something worse. Here's the part that matters for anyone over 50. That proofreading system gets measurably less efficient as we age. At the exact moment your body has accumulated the most wear and tear, its ability to catch and fix new errors starts to slip. What accelerates that slippage more than almost anything else? Highly processed food, packaged snacks, sugary drinks, processed meats, the kind of food engineered to be eaten without much thought. Large population studies, including major cohort research out of Europe and the United States over the past several years, have repeatedly linked diets heavy in ultra-processed foods to higher rates of colorectal cancer and other cancers, independent of body weight. That last part is worth sitting with. It's not just that these foods make people gain weight, and weight gain raises risk. The food itself appears to do damage on its own, likely by driving chronic low-grade inflammation and flooding cells with byproducts that interfere with their repair machinery. Picture someone like Sandra, not a real patient, just a composite of what researchers see again and again in the data. A woman in her late 50s whose daily diet was built almost entirely around convenience. Cereal for breakfast, a packaged sandwich at lunch, crackers and processed cheese to get through the afternoon. It's an extremely common pattern, and it's exactly the pattern the research flags as quietly raising inflammatory markers year after year. Now picture the same person swapping out just one processed item per meal for a whole food version, oats instead of sugary cereal, a boiled egg instead of packaged lunch meat tea, an apple and walnuts instead of a wrapped snack bar. That single unglamorous shift is consistently associated in the literature with measurable drops in inflammatory markers like CRP over the following months. That's the actionable version of habit 5. You don't need to overhaul your entire pantry overnight. Replace one processed item per meal with something closer to its original form. That's it. And keep this in mind as we move forward, because this habit doesn't work alone. It sets the stage for the habit number 4, which is where things start to get genuinely fascinating. Because when most people think about sleep, they think about feeling rested the next morning. Researchers who study cancer prevention think about something else entirely: immune surveillance. Your immune system includes a specialized unit called natural killer cells, NK cells for short, whose entire function is to patrol your bloodstream and tissue, hunting down abnormal cells before they can multiply into something dangerous. Think of them as an internal security detail, walking the halls of your body 24 hours a day. And here's what most people never learn. The strength of that patrol is largely set by how well and how deeply you sleep. The deepest stages of sleep, the slow wave sleep that dominates the first few hours of the night, trigger a release of signaling proteins that boost NK cell activity Y. As we age, particularly past 60, the amount of slow wave sleep our bodies naturally generate declines substantially, which means without any intervention, your internal security patrol is running on a skeleton crew. Sleep researchers have found that even short-term sleep restriction, Just a handful of nights under 6 hours can suppress natural killer cell activity dramatically in otherwise healthy adults. And larger population analyses tracking sleep duration across hundreds of thousands of people have linked chronically short sleep to meaningfully elevated risk across several cancer types. Think of someone like Robert, again, a composite drawn from patterns clinicians see constantly, a retired professional who wore his ability to function on 5 or 6 hours of sleep almost like a badge of honor. He wasn't overweight, he didn't smoke, he exercised, but his sleep was short and fragmented, and when researchers look at people who fit that exact profile, they consistently find weaker immune markers than you'd expect given everything else about their health. The fix isn't complicated, and it isn't about willpower at 11 p.m., it's about your wake time. Sleep scientists will tell you that a fixed wake-up time, 7 days a week, does more to anchor your circadian rhythm than any bedtime ritual. Pick a wake time, keep it identical on weekends, within about a week. On sleep architecture in adults over 50 starts to measurably improve. Layer that consistent, deeper sleep on top of the dietary shift from habit 5, and something interesting happens. Your baseline inflammation drops low enough that your immune surveillance system finally has room to do the job it was built for. But we're only 2 habits in, and what comes next? Intervenes directly in the biological clock of your cells, in a way scientists have only really understood over the past decade and a half. Let's talk about habit number 3. And I want to reframe a word for you before we go further, because the word exercise makes a lot of people over 50 immediately tune out. What I'm describing isn't a gym membership or a training plan. It's purposeful daily movement, and its effect on cancer biology is specific enough that it deserves far more attention than it gets. At the center of this is a hormone called insulin-like growth factor 1, or IGF-1. In youth, IGF-1 drives healthy growth and development. It's doing exactly what it's supposed to do. But after 50, chronically elevated IGF-1, which tends to track closely with sedentary behavior, starts to behave less like a growth signal and more like fertilizer for abnormal cell proliferation. Regular movement is one of the few interventions consistently shown to bring IGF-1 down, while also supporting the activity of p53, a tumor-suppressing protein that functions almost like your cell's internal stop sign against runaway growth. Large cohort studies tracking well over 100,000 adults have found that people who log around 150 minutes of moderate movement a week, the standard public health benchmark, show meaningfully lower rates of several cancers and lower recurrence rates among cancer survivors compared to those who are largely sedentary. And a separate line of research on sitting habits found something almost too simple to believe. Breaking up long stretches of sitting with just a 5-minute walk every hour lowered inflammatory markers linked to tumor growth without any structured workout at all. Consider someone like Eleanor, a 71-year-old 2 years past a stage 1 breast cancer diagnosis, living with arthritis that ruled out running or traditional gym workouts. Her plan wasn't built around intensity, it was built around consistency. A brisk walk after breakfast, standing. Instead of sitting through an evening TV show, 5-minute stretch breaks every hour during a sedentary afternoon. That kind of low-friction movement plan is exactly what shows up in the research as sustainable and effective for people managing joint pain, fatigue, or simply a dislike of formal exercise. The starting point for you is almost absurdly simple, a 20-minute walk after your largest meal of the day. Post-meal walking has been shown in controlled research to blunt the blood sugar spike that follows eating. And that spike, left unchecked, feeds the exact metabolic pathways that fuel abnormal cell growth. No gym, no equipment, just your front door and a habit you can keep. And when this movement habit stacks on top of better sleep and a cleaner diet, 3 of the most cancer-relevant markers in your bloodstream, IGF-1, CRP, and inflammatory cytokines, tend to drop together in a way no single habit achieves on its own. If this is landing for you, take 30 seconds right now to like this video and share it with someone over 50 who needs to hear it. It genuinely helps this kind of research reach more people who need it instead of getting buried under supplement ads. Now, habit number 2 is the one that surprised me most when I first went digging through the research, because it's something every single one of us does constantly, and almost nobody thinks about it in relation to cancer risk at all. I know manage your stress sounds like a wellness platitude, not a clinical intervention, but the biology behind it is anything but soft. The molecule at the center of this is cortisol, your primary stress hormone. In short bursts, cortisol is exactly what your body needs. It's the emergency response system working as designed. The problem is chronic elevation, the kind that builds up from ongoing anxiety, grief, loneliness, or unresolved stress that never fully resolves. When cortisol stays elevated for months or years, it appears to interfere with the story. His cortisol rhythm was inverted. Low in the morning, when it should peak, and stress anymore, it's just become the water they swim in. the intervention that helped bring a pattern like that back toward normal, wasn't therapy or a retreat. It was something almost embarrassingly small. A few minutes of slow, deliberate breathing each morning, a short evening walk without a phone, and one standing weekly commitment to see another person face to face. And the research backs up just how small the effective dose really is. Controlled studies have found that as little as 12 minutes of daily mindful breathing, practiced consistently over 8 weeks, measurably lowers cortisol and improves markers of immune activity in adults over 55. You don't need an app subscription or a meditation retreat. You need a quiet chair and a breathing pattern. In through the nose for 4 counts, hold for 7, release for 8, 12 minutes. That's the starting point. Stack this on top of the sleep habit from a moment ago, and something compounds beautifully. Cortisol is one of the primary disruptors of deep sleep. So calming it down doesn't just protect your DNA repair genes. IT also gives your slow wave sleep more room to do its job. Everything we've covered so far, the food, the sleep, the movement, the stress, has been building toward this final habit because researchers increasingly describe it as the one that ties every other mechanism together into a single unified intervention. And it might be the most misunderstood item on this entire list because it's so often dismissed as just another diet trend. Habit number 1 centers on a cellular process called autophagy, from Greek meaning self-eating. It sounds unsettling, but it's actually one of the most elegant defense mechanisms your body has. When you go a meaningful stretch of time without eating, generally somewhere in the range of 12 to 16 hours, your cells shift into a cleanup mode. They begin identifying and breaking down damaged components, misfolded proteins, worn-out mitochondria, and cells that are starting to drift toward abnormal behavior. Think of it as your body running a nightly diagnostic and maintenance cycle, clearing out exactly the kind of cellular debris that, left to accumulate, becomes the foundation for disease. In younger adults, this cycle tends to run efficiently on its own. After 50, autophagy efficiency drops off substantially, and a huge part of that decline has nothing to do with biology and everything to do with modern eating patterns. Constant grazing, food available from the moment we wake until right before bed, means many adults simply never stay in a fasted state long enough to trigger a meaningful autophagic response. Damaged cells don't get cleared. They accumulate. And accumulated cellular damage is, at its core, the seedbed cancer grows from. Controlled trials on time-restricted eating, where people confine their food intake to a consistent window each day without necessarily changing what or how much they eat, have found reductions in IGF-1, drops in inflammatory markers like CRP, and increases in biological markers of autophagy, compared to people eating across a much wider window. One notable clinical trial following older adults over an extended eating window protocol found improvements in markers of oxidative DNA damage and tumor suppressor gene activity, with no caloric restriction required at all, just a tighter window for when eating happens. Think about someone like Michael, 61, a school teacher with a family history of pancreatic cancer and a history of precancerous colon polyps. He wasn't overweight, and his diet, by most standards, looked reasonable. But his eating window stretched 16 hours, coffee at 6 in the morning, a late snack at 10 at night. That kind of window is remarkably common, and it's exactly the pattern researchers point to when explaining why autophagy markers run low even in people who otherwise look metabolically healthy. Tightening that window to roughly 10 hours, first bite around 8 in the morning, last bite by 6 in the evening, water and black coffee freely allowed outside that window, is the kind of simple shift that T shows up repeatedly in the research as meaningfully improving metabolic and cellular markers within months. Here's the implementation, stripped down to its simplest form. You don't need to skip meals, and you don't need to count a single calorie. You need a consistent eating window of somewhere between 10 and 12 hours, protected daily. If your first coffee with cream lands at 7, your kitchen closes at 7 that night. If breakfast is at 8, dinner wraps by 6. Outside that window, water, plain black coffee, unsweetened tea, nothing else. Your body handles the rest. And here's the part that makes this the true master lever of the 5. Time-restricted eating doesn't just work on its own, it amplifies everything we've already covered. It lowers IGF-1, the same pathway targeted by movement. It helps stabilize cortisol rhythm, reinforcing the stress regulation habit. It deepens slow-wave sleep. And it lowers systemic inflammation even on days when your diet isn't perfect. That's why researchers keep circling back to it as the habit that pulls every other lever tighter. So let's bring this all the way home, because what we've walked through today isn't 5 disconnected tips. It's one integrated strategy, each piece reinforcing the next. Cutting back on ultra-processed food protects the DNA repair machinery that naturally weakens with age. Prioritizing deep, consistent sleep restores the natural killer cell activity your immune system relies on to catch trouble early. Daily purposeful movement keeps growth-promoting hormones in check while supporting your body's built-in tumor suppressors. Deliberate stress regulation protects the very genes responsible for repairing DNA damage in the first place. And time-restricted eating activates the cellular cleanup process that ties every one of those mechanisms together. None of this requires a prescription, a subscription, or a single dollar spent. It requires a walk after dinner, a fixed wake-up time, 12 minutes of quiet breathing, one swapped-out processed snack, and a kitchen that closes a little earlier. Small, unglamorous, repeatable choices, the kind that don't make headlines, but that the research keeps pointing back to, year after year, study after study. If you're sitting there thinking it's too late to start, or that decades of habits are too baked in to change, the research doesn't back that up. These findings come from studies of people exactly like you, adults in their 50s, 60s, and 70s, who made a handful of specific targeted shifts and produced changes in their bodies that showed up in follow-up blood work and inflammation markers, in the kind of numbers doctors actually watch. It's never too late for your body to start repairing itself more effectively than it did yesterday. Start with one habit this week. Pick whichever one feels most doable, not most impressive. Come back next week and add another. Let me know in the comments which one you're starting with, and I'll check back in and follow up with more of the research behind whichever habits you want to go deeper on. Thanks for spending this time with me. Take care of yourself, and I'll see you in the next one.